Thank you, Gaurav, for setting the stage so well for our conversation over the next 1 hour. So originally we had wanted to first focus this segment on some of the global shifts ongoing, how that relates to Sri Lanka's own macro situation, and then evolving from there, how do we go from stability to growth? But as you can imagine, it doesn't make sense to stick to that format. We will cover the global environment as well as Sri Lanka's growth prospects. But first, let's link the conversation that we're having today to the contemporary reality that we are faced with now. And I would like to start with giving ST an opportunity to share a little bit about how the government is thinking about this disaster recovery. This is the first forum that you have an opportunity to speak to such a large private sector audience who are very keen to support. If you could tell us a little bit about the kind of funding sources the government is looking at, how you're reaching out to international partners, how you're trying to find space in an already very tight budget. So give us an overview of right now. I know it's early days, but how the government is thinking about this recovery program.
Thank you very much. Very good morning to all of you all. I know maybe most of us may be trying to smile and put a smile on our face, but I know deep inside it's heavy hearts because fellow citizens, what they have gone through. Many lives are lost, and the psychological impact of the surviving of those related are huge. Similarly, the financial impact and the physical damages to the structures, etc., it's also huge, as well as the livelihood that have been lost for people to get back. So in a situation like this, what is very important is to act fast and act decisively, proportionate to the level of the challenge ahead of us. That's where the government mechanism, state officials will move in. And immediately after the extent or the scenario as the scenario was unfolding, a lot of measures were put in place to make sure that after the event is, after the aftermath, we will have a better tomorrow than what we had prior to 20th of November for the future of this country. In order to do that, so the strategy was to look at what is immediate requirement, what is short-term intervention, and what is the long-term intervention. Immediate requirement was in terms of rescue and save as many lives as possible. In order to do that, we had the Triforces and the police working right throughout, saving lives by putting their lives at risk. Those heroes, some of them had sacrificed to save the lives of others. So the rescue efforts are ongoing, but it has helped many to get into safety as early as possible. And some people, perhaps who did not take the messages seriously, early warning messages seriously, chose to stay in either their places of businesses for valid reasons and at their residences. So they were stuck on those floodlands, and the subsequent rescue mission was to take them back to safety. And in doing so, a lot of support that we received from the international community. Immediate responses were sent from the neighboring India. Helicopters were sent, the rescue teams were sent. As we speak, many teams are arriving. Support from many different countries, supports were provided. And in some of the cases, medical assistance, medical teams are already on the ground helping some of the rescue and post-rescue operations there. So we are blessed with those relationships as a country that we have nurtured, cultured over a period of time, and a lot of support and assistance. Similarly, then the short-term measures that we need to do, we needed to get a hand of the extent of damage of my memory, 4 days back or 3 days back, 4 days back as of today, World Bank has offered the assistance to assess the extent of damage through their rapid damage, post-damage assistance system, which government has engaged them formally 4 days back for them to proceed with that assessment. We are expecting within 2 weeks period from the time of assigning to have that initial understanding of some credible information as to the extent of damage. Parallelly, we are working with them to get assistance to get some numbers onto those extent of damages also. In not only the structures that have number of structures that was damaged, but the cost of those damages also. So those activities are engaging, and similarly, the cleaning up efforts have already started because it's very important to give the connectivity back to people to start their lives, connectivity back to businesses to continue their operations. So this is where the mobile operators who were supporting us, they're here. I just got to know from Dialogue, who's here with us today, that the connection is restored right across. Enormous support from the business community for the efforts that the government is putting to ensure that the country is back on track. So in terms of swiftness of those responses as of now, the connectivity in terms of road infrastructure, wherever possible, the extent of damage and the impact is assessed, and at least temporary measures are created for allowing people to move. Similarly, aid inflow into the country, both in terms of financial aid as well as the goods that we are receiving. I'm sure you all would have seen many days back, we announced for well-wishers and families and friends to donate money to affected communities, to be channeled to affected communities. Update as of yesterday was over 300 million rupees that we have received, and I'm waiting for some of the transfers through sweeping accounts to come back to, but significant, over 10,000 transfers I'm being told through various foreign currencies, over 19,000 transactions or different transfers that we have received as of now. This is within few days. This is just a starting point. So facilities were created immediately. As I mentioned, it is acting and acting fast. And the financial assistance was opened up, allowing people to contribute. Similarly, I'm sure some of you all would have seen, there's a special task force set up and headed by customs. So the mechanism to send goods to Sri Lanka through simplified documentation, simplified clearing process with zero taxes and fees. A process is already set up and it is available on the website. So any goods that are being sent to Sri Lanka where the consignee is marked as DMC, Disaster Management Center, will be cleared through this expedite process, and we expect immediate clearance at the customs. So teams are monitoring the progress on those activities, and the information is available. And a very important aspect of this effort is keeping people informed also. So social media is helping to get the right message across, even though there may be few who want to share to derail the efforts, but I'm sure majority wants to support the efforts that the government is taking. But the most important question is relating to rebuilding Sri Lanka. That is where a plan is already put in place. I'm sure some of the business leaders who are with us here in this room today, we were talking to them continuously for the last 4 or 5 days, engaging. President himself was having discussions in person, no matter whether it is early morning or whether it is 10 o'clock in the night. The team business leaders who are here know the details and the extent that we have gone to facilitate, to keep them informed as to what we are doing. And as a result of those efforts, Cabinet has made a decision to set up the Rebuilding Sri Lanka Fund with involvement of both private sector and state officials and from the political authority also, to give the leadership, direction, and the sense of unity in this exercise. I know these challenges will come, but it's all about how we respond and react. We will take some more questions as it comes. Thank you.
Thank you, ST. I think it was very useful for the business community to hear from you to understand how you're thinking of the different stages of this recovery and rebuild effort. Before I move on, I'm going to ask Georg to very briefly help our audience understand what is this post-disaster assessment process, how does it help a government, maybe even the private sector, understand the extent, and typically what happens next in this kind of an assessment in terms of World Bank. Maybe Georg could briefly mention from a World Bank technical point of view what this kind of product, if you will, is and how it supports us in informing our next steps.
Thank you. Thank you. Secretary has done an outstanding job in already presenting what also World Bank is doing. I really appreciate and commend the efforts of the government. ST already on Saturday was on phone with me and many others, making sure that we are ready and aligned. On Sunday, we already sent our ideas and proposals. By Sunday afternoon, we already had a response what the government would like us to do, and the crisis was still unfolding. So one of the things we would do is this rapid assessment, which is called GRADE. I don't remember exactly the whole abbreviation, but it is exactly what Secretary said, is to assess damages using mostly data from satellites, from imagery, from drones and desk research, to provide very quick assessment of damage and priority areas, so that efforts of the government and institutions like ours is targeting these priority areas. There is different mechanism then later, which takes months, to have much more detailed assessment, not only of damages, but losses and needs and so on. And it will be up to the government how they want to proceed. But I hope that the work that we'll do, and we are working closely with our development partners, with UN, with ADB, to make sure that we also get inputs from them, because they have also a lot of data and experience. We can really contribute to that. We have a lot of experience in Sri Lanka, starting from the tsunami days to 2016-17 floods, to a COVID period, to also 2022 crisis, activating many of these mechanisms and responding immediately, going beyond, of course, the assessment. We have already offered specific funding from repurposing money that can be basically flowing already to help people within a matter of days, and we have a longer term plans. And we as individuals also will be contributing as much as we can. My colleagues from the World Bank Group office, as we speak, are making food as part of the Soup Kitchen initiative and distributing it to hundreds of people who are in need here in Colombo. I would have joined them as well if I wasn't here. I will definitely join them next time. Happy to elaborate on this. Thank you.
I'd like to move on to Governor. We talked about the fiscal responses. From the central bank point of view, we saw central bank coming forward to facilitate some of the international funding coming through. But also, Governor, if you could very briefly give us a sense of how the central bank is responding to some of the immediate requirements. And later on in the conversation, we'll get to the more systemic issues around inflation.
Yeah, thank you, Anushka. I think from our point of view, immediate responses that we basically activated is like during the crisis period, as well as earlier this kind of internal shocks like tsunami period. I can remember even that time, immediately activated the assistance for people to make contributions, especially from the external sources, that we activated this mechanism for external kind of Sri Lankans who are willing to support at this point. We immediately opened up these accounts, and we see now people are contributing to those accounts, plus the government Bank of Ceylon account for the local and even international donors and supporters who can contribute. That's the immediate response. In addition, what I see in this kind of situation, what is important to prepare this kind of shocks. For example, even this year we had this Liberation Day external shock that was unexpected. So we had some plans. Likewise, this internal shock, climate-related shock, we had even in the past. But it's most important that we have been talking about to face this kind of shock. It's important part is to build sufficient buffers from the overall macro situation, from the fiscal, monetary, external. This is the opportunity even from the banking sector, for us to use those buffers. This is the reason we build these buffers for us to be used at this kind of event, not to use that under normal circumstances. I know from the treasury side, the government is in a very comfortable situation, especially in the short-term relief in terms of fiscal buffers. And from our side, external sector, compared to where we were in terms of external resource, we are in a much better position now. In case if we are to support, we have sufficient reasonable buffers. On the monetary side, we are willing to provide any liquidity support to the banking system, that we are ready to support if there's any need. I don't see last couple of days we haven't seen that. And also from the banking side, stability, where the capital buffers, liquidity buffers in terms of even profits from the banking side, build sufficient buffers. So now banking sector is ready to support and do relief for the people who have been affected. They were ready with all the necessary buffers in place. Now it's a time for us to use those buffers to support and basically smoothen out the impact of this kind of shock to the overall economy.
Thank you, Governor. Lilia, I'm going to come to you before I then go to Saurav to zoom out a little bit. Give us a quick snapshot of how the ADB as another large partner also has been involved with infrastructure, supporting Sri Lanka with infrastructure in the past. How is the ADB now thinking about the response, and also how is it fitting into the planned already, you had the country partnership program and so on. How is this fitting into some of the priorities you all had already thought about was important to support Sri Lanka on?
Thank you, Anushka. Before replying to your question, let me just say that on behalf of ADB, we mourn the loss of lives, and we are grateful to all those who work day and night on these rescue operations. So our deepest condolences to all affected families. So on ADB's side, we, of course, our response was immediate as well. We started working with the government right after we heard the news about the disaster. So let me go through all the actions that we are right now working on. The immediate emergency response is that we are processing an emergency grant, which will be up to $3 million. So we are working actively with the government, but also with the UN Resident Coordinator Office. So this is an immediate emergency support for immediate needs, which means medical support, food, temporary shelters, debris removal, so everything that is really urgent, immediate needs. So we are expediting this process, and we hope that this will be finalized within days. So this is first thing we focused on. Then now we are looking into any opportunities to reallocate funds that exist in our portfolio, so into existing projects. This is an approach that we already did back in 2022 during the early days of the economic crisis. What ADB did is reallocated funds from different projects for up to 90 million. And this is also a type of immediate, quick response that we can give these funds for other crisis recovery-related needs. And then, so this is really immediate near-term support that ADB is considering. Then we are also looking for more medium-term recovery support. And what we are considering is an emergency assistance loan. And this, again, we used this approach back in 2022 during the crisis. What ADB did is to start looking what are the undisbursed, non-urgent funds available again in existing projects that we can consolidate and offer a separate emergency assistance loan. So back in 2022, we managed to consolidate up to $200 million. So we are still working on that. We don't know the amount, we don't know the scope yet of that specific emergency assistance loan. But the scope will be, of course, based on the post-disaster needs assessment. So we are also waiting for the results of this assessment, and the amount will be also based on what will be available. And then, of course, we have 2024 2026 pipeline coming up. We already agreed the scope of the project that we will be working with the government, but there is a possibility to rediscuss the scope of those projects to target them more on recovery and reconstruction needs.
I will come back to both you and Georg later as we talk about some of the medium-term reform areas to get a sense of how much or not those earlier planned DPOs, PBLs, policy reform-linked loans might continue or might need to be adjusted. So just think a little bit about what you might say on that. Saurav, I'm going to come to you. We heard across this panel the word crisis being used. Until a week ago, that word was only used in the context of 2022 and something that was largely behind us. Help us understand how the international finance, capital market, investor community might see what's going on here in Sri Lanka alongside the very positive macro trajectory we were on. Give us a sense from the outside.
Sure. So if you look from the outside investors, and if I have to classify them, there are broadly three sets, right? One, who are mostly invested in Sri Lanka through the dollar bonds or the sovereign bonds. Then there is separate class, which is now interested in Sri Lanka, and we have seen the inflow through the Sri Lankan government bonds as well. And finally, there are the corporate investors who are interested more from the FDI perspective, putting investment into Sri Lanka. Now, if you look at, obviously, all these three classes of investors are looking extremely positively towards the country. From the dollar bond perspective, there, obviously, everyone is looking through different lenses into the country. The focus is primarily because of their own triggers related to the sovereign bonds. The focus is related to the growth, which is the real GDP growth target, which they have, and everyone is pretty much confident that Sri Lanka will exceed the 11.5% cumulative target, which was set in the covenants, etc. Plus, they are looking at the external sector pretty closely, because one of the things which is there in the performance matrix is the nominal GDP in dollar terms. Again, most of them are pretty confident that $100 billion, while the top end target is 104.5 or something, but $100 billion target GDP is something which is pretty much achievable if Sri Lanka sticks to the current path under the IMF program. If you look at the investors, if you talk to the investors who are investing in the Sri Lankan government bonds, who are looking to invest, and there is a class which is coming now, they are mostly interested in the inflation, which again they are pretty much confident given the central bank independence now which has been set up, and the fiscal trajectory. Though a question which is coming now is, at least till last week, was how long could Sri Lanka keep outperforming on the fiscal targets, because the outperformance has been massive and it has also come at the cost of some of the miss in the capex estimates, which could be sort of negative, slightly negative from the longer term growth prospect. But as of now, everyone is pretty happy because of the fiscal outperformance and how it has helped in the medium term towards the yield part, government yield part. Finally, from the corporate side, everyone is looking to invest into Sri Lanka. Now, I know for sure that there have been MNC companies who have already visited Sri Lanka in order to understand how the economy is developing. Their own team has come in. They are looking at what are the structural reforms which Sri Lanka is doing, plus the whole geopolitical aspect of the investment, where people are now looking to diversify geographies. They are looking at Sri Lanka. It could be new investments, it could be bidding for government projects, but corporate investors are quite positively looking at Sri Lanka. It's a matter of time, because some of the ratings, the final rating upgrade has happened just now. 2 was already done. But they are looking positively at Sri Lanka in terms of both FDI as well as participating in government projects, etc., in the next coming years.
If I was to just push a bit further on how you think those three categories of investors might see the recent, the Cyclone Ditwa related impacts and how that might affect the macro, do you think they will see in the context of, say, other parts of Southeast Asia also having had those impacts? These are investors who are generally savvy to these. This is not from a fundamental domestic irresponsibility related shift in the macro trajectory. But at the same time, it does have real impacts on some of the factors like the fiscal that they were looking at to see whether it can be. So maybe it's too early to tell, but how do you assess that view that they might have?
No, so we have already received queries in yesterday itself, where people had been asking about the fiscal space, because that's one space which is likely to get impacted. But as of now, the worries are lower because of the fiscal buffers which the government has. As I said, there has been a massive outperformance on the fiscal targets, even this year, in the first 10 months data, about 9 to 10 months data what we have. Because of the outperformance, at least the investor set is not worried about the fiscal slippage because of the buffers which the government already has with it. They are slightly worried if it could impact the current account, which they are not seeing immediately. But if that happens, it could have it because of the implication on the currency. That's what worries them.
Right. ST, I'll come to you in a moment just to comment on the fiscal and how do we find space within the already good space that we had. Governor, if I was to turn to you, today, even prior to the events of last week, while we were on a good domestic macro footing, we were anxious about shifts in the global environment. So if you were to kind of bring those two worlds together and help us think about what are those factors that were already shaping uncertainty around Sri Lanka's growth trajectory or the macro trajectory. The title of the session is taking a look at the macro dashboard. Apart from tell us about some of those macro factors domestically that were doing well, and some of the factors that due to external shifts were already on our watch list, if you will.
Thank you. One of the uncertainties we had this year still to a certain extent was this geoeconomics, especially coming from US tariff issue. Compared to where we were, kind of uncertainties we had, first part is the kind of, for us, what is more important was the US tariff policy. We had a lot of concerns at that point. Now we can see that it's been softening out in terms of its impact on Sri Lanka as well as other markets. Earlier, very aggressive stance that this administration was taking, we can see that is smoothing out. I can see compared to where we were, that issue, I think, to a certain extent, have been stabilizing in my view. So that's one concern we had. But other than that, there was some concerns on the geopolitical side, on the energy prices. But again, when you look at its impact on Sri Lanka, obviously compared to where we were, and also given the very high renewable energy share now we are seeing in the energy sector, I don't see a significant impact coming from that part. But on the domestic side, what we are seeing in the recent months, especially from the increasing imports and the current account surpluses we have been generating for first 10 months of this year, turning into a small deficits for last 2 months as a result of this demand for vehicle imports that happened during after pent-up demand. Now we can see that is now also settling down, and that's been now tapering down the demand for imports. As a result, now we saw some pressure on the external side last month. Now it is now gradually settling down. Even before this event happened, it's still settling down. I don't think this event will have a significant external kind of a shock in terms of balance of payment, because what we see there's immediate impact would be more fiscal. External impact, I don't see that as a significant impact from this event. But over a period of time, when governments start rebuilding reconstruction within the budgetary framework, and obviously with some external support coming through the multilateral agencies, that can be also set off. So this is where I think I don't see a significant kind of headwinds from the external, that kind of shocks. Other one is that global interest rates, that US Fed monetary policy stance that a lot of people are talking about, expecting the rate cut this month in December, but there could be a delay in further easing going forward with relatively high inflation in the US. But I don't see that has a significant impact on our balance of payment side, because as Sir already alluded, we don't have much exposure to all these kind of global interests is not a major factor for us to have had significant inflows or outflows in terms of portfolio inflows. That's not a significant impact. Only thing we need to monitor is the overall trade, supply chain diversion, and I mean, last week there was a presentation here, again showing the exports from Asia, despite those tariffs, still exports from China, all these markets are increasing at a very high pace. That is where I don't see a significant impact on the trade diversion, but still this impact could have a small shock in terms of supply chain disruption, especially for our suppliers here. That will have to be managed.
ST, could you give, you heard from Saurav who said even the external community were quite positive on Sri Lanka's fiscal gains and the fiscal consolidation. We know that in many years, economists all of us have said we need to create fiscal space for events such as these. And for the first time in a long time, we actually have that fiscal space. Could you give us a sense of to what extent is that fiscal space likely to deteriorate, or how are you going to find money within the budget? We know that there was already some sluggishness in implementing capex projects. We know that even in the social protection disbursements, it was slow and not as widespread as expected. So to what extent will this fiscal agenda be impacted by what we have experienced over the last few days, or were we on a really good fiscal footing that you're not too worried about that being an issue?
I think Sri Lankans and Sri Lanka as a country is known for our resilience. And this is another opportunity for us to demonstrate as a country as to the level of resilience that we have as a community to come out from where we are. And in terms of our preparedness, the preparations and provisions were already available to meet a situation of this nature. That's why budgetary provisions for emergency situations are already made available. From that, nearly 30 billion is now set aside to deal with immediate challenges that we have at hand. And it is the financial discipline that we brought into the system, zero tolerance for corruption, that channeled the funding into the treasury, allowed us to build the buffers that Governor mentioned to face situations of this nature and look forward with positivity that we can manage it. And we are, based on the information that we have, we are quite certain this will not create a major impact. However, we need to look at sources, we need to work with the partners, and we need to work with investors and other communities to ensure the rebuilding effort will continue and it will attract funding into Sri Lanka, so we will be able to maintain and balance different segments that we need to deal with. And in the journey, I just want to touch base. It is about providing, it is about getting it implemented at the ground. At treasury level, we can have provisions and allocations. You mentioned about the capex implementation. So we can have provisions, but it's all about implementation also. I would like to highlight, based on the data that I have seen so far, this year is no exception compared to the previous years. In fact, it will be better than some of the previous years in terms of capital expenditure utilization, based on the numbers that I have seen so far. Having said that, it's about implementation even during the disaster times. That's where swift action was taken by the government to allow up to 50 million rupees to be used by a divisional secretariat at the lowest level of the implementation cycle. And another circular we just released, allowing the ministry secretaries to engage and authorize up to 150 million rupees. And similar authorization. This is to make sure nothing in circulars or in the bureaucracy will be a challenge for implementation, will be a block to make sure that it will facilitate the quick implementation of those engagements. And because of the preparation, When we looked at the BOI, I checked with the BOI whether zones are being significantly affected to ensure that our fiscal cycle will continue. Businesses will be able to continue with their work. It was good to hear that it was with least very minimal impact except for some power outage and water supply disruptions, etc. But I understand some businesses are affected. I'll be meeting the insurance regulatory agency and the industry shortly to understand their responses that we were in touch with them to help businesses to get back on foot very quickly, ASAP, and support individuals to contribute back into the economy. This is to ensure the livelihood of people is not disturbed or disturbance is minimized to the maximum extent possible. And as a result, our initial projections for 2026, there are no significant deviations. So we are confident that we will be able to meet the challenge very positive.
Let's move on to a slightly more medium-term conversation, particularly with Georg, Lilia, and others. But before I do that, I've been asked to remind you that you can be part of this conversation. You can submit your questions and respond to polls by visiting slido.com on your mobile device and entering the code 2239773, or by scanning the QR code displayed on the screen or on your table. There won't be any direct audience questions from the hall, so please submit it through this app, and I'll be taking some of those questions. Lilia, I want to turn to you to also link to some of the things Georg mentioned, because in his remarks he talked a lot about some of those medium-term policy challenges. The title originally of this was really about how do you go from stability to growth. We recognize that stability is now being, and growth is now have to be relooked at in the context of the immediate disaster, but that doesn't take away from the fact that we already had some productivity challenges, innovation challenges, trade and competitiveness challenges. So could you give us a sense of your view and the ADB's view around what are those challenges that we need to overcome to really get to sustained higher growth?
Thank you, Anushka. So let me go through more on what ADB looks on the outlook in this year and next year. Of course, we had no time yet to factor in what will be the impact of the disaster. So before getting this news on the disaster, of course, our view is still that recovery will continue. So this year and next year. So this is in line with most of the projections we see from different partners and also from the government. Of course, the remarkable growth that we saw in 2024 was exceptionally high and strong. So we think that it will slow down. But then for 2025, again, we saw this robust performance in the first half of the year. We are expecting the third quarter also to be very, very strong as well. We are still waiting for the GDP figure. But then, of course, the fourth quarter will be when we will see the first impact of the disaster. And most of the impact will be visible in 2026, I think. This is where we will see the impact in the numbers of the national accounts. So what we are expecting for 2025 is that growth will remain robust, so recovery continues. This is because there is this low interest rates environment. We see this notable increase in private credit. This is record high levels of private credit flowing to the private sector for different purposes. Of course, there are short-term and long-term needs. What is important to understand if this credit goes to long-term investments, because this is the one that will bring the long-term growth that we are talking about. But if this is what we are seeing right now is credit is also fueling some consumer demand, which is why the growth trajectory so far is only consumption-led. So what we want to see in our upside scenarios is to move to more to this investment-led growth model, which is where all the important enabling environment reforms are important, such as reforms that should continue. This will bring all the investor confidence and then FDI inflows. And this is very important for Sri Lanka in the current context of challenging debt situation where non-debt creating flows are the most important. So any private sector investment, private investments, FDIs, PPP projects, all those will create this private sector-led growth model that will be important to sustain. And then, of course, this disaster was a reminder that what is important also to direct financing to climate resilient infrastructures and also build this resilience to shocks, including climate and disaster shocks. So this is another important point to look when we think about the development agenda of the country next year and more on the long term. But on the really immediate, this year and next year, our main concern is for recovery to continue with the same pace. And then we are also factoring in the tariff uncertainty that the governor just mentioned. This year, I think we were all wrong on the tariff impact, not only for Sri Lanka, I think all over Asia. We were all expecting all-out trade wars. We were expecting even recession in some countries because of tariff uncertainty. It did not happen. So countries are now more resilient than they were, for example, back in 2008 when the financial crisis hit. So now there are clear, good policy fundamentals. There is a credible monetary policy framework. There is this strong fiscal discipline that helps to withstand these shocks. And I think, this is a clear reminder that now this tariff uncertainty, 2025 impact was not as visible as we were expecting. But if you ask me what we should look for 2026 is how now the firms, businesses will respond to this new trade landscape. So of course this tariff change is now at a different level. So we call it at the ADB's report a new trade landscape for Asian countries, developing Asian countries. What we are expecting now to see how businesses adapt to this. Are they starting to readjust their supply chains or doing some trade diversion? What will happen? Because in 2025, we haven't seen. I think because businesses were most in the mood of wait and see and understand how this trade, this uncertainty fog will pass. So now the uncertainty is still high. I think, I've heard someone saying, this is the new normal. So uncertainty is here to stay. I think next year we will still have high level of uncertainty. But for businesses, it is important to understand where should they sell their products, what are their export destinations, what is the supply chain for their intermediate inputs. So I think, one thing to watch closely for the outlook for Sri Lanka is how this tariff impact will materialize on the economy. Thank you.
Saurav, do you share a similar view on the tariff impacts? Because we are also still seeing some uncertainty around the growth path in the US. I don't think the story is done yet on the impact of tariff on domestic growth in the US. We have also concerns about a stock market bubble, which we've known historically has then spilled over into weak US economic performance. EU is, of course, doing a little better. So many of the folks in the room here are also exporters who rely on international markets. What is your sense of what we can expect in 2026 and what Sri Lanka should look for in the external environment?
So clearly to us, tariff uncertainty remains. And obviously one of the things to watch out for in the month of December itself is probably the Supreme Court verdict on the tariffs. Now we don't expect tariffs to go out completely from even after the verdict, but this could alter some of the landscape related to the tariff agreements, what we have seen. So things could change. Probably we will know it by the end of this month, how things will move after the Supreme Court verdict. In fact, there were some media reports which are indicating that the verdict could come as early as 10th of December. So that's one of the key things to watch out for. Obviously, if you look from the global perspective, there are three key dynamics which would shape apart from the tariffs. One, obviously, is the inflation perspective. Now, core PC, even in the US, is running at least 100 basis points above the central bank target. Now, it doesn't impact Sri Lanka directly, but what it means is the monetary space for the rest of the world is likely to be much more limited than what they have done in 2025, where most of the central banks did aggressively cut even in the emerging space, cut the policy rates to support growth. Now, with monetary space getting limited, what we are expecting is that most of the governments will use fiscal space to support growth, which we are already seeing in the areas such as Euro area, where Germany is trying to push, but that would lead to a higher debt to GDP ratio, which in a way would mean that the emerging market interest rate space would be higher. The interest rates would be higher rather than lower. Finally is the liquidity, which you mentioned in the final part. Now, this year, 2025, if you look at most of the asset class, apart from oil, everyone has outperformed quite significantly. Now, it's not for me to say if there is a bubble or not, but clearly the central bank policies on liquidity will determine how the global asset class will perform, and that would lead to volatility in most of the asset class. Probably gold would be the most supported asset class because investors would flock onto gold given the uncertainty. But apart from tariff, these three things related to inflation, fiscal, as well as the liquidity will be the key determinant on how the global trajectory shapes up.
Governor, I was just checking to see if there were any questions. Nothing yet, so maybe I'll remind all of you, we have about another 10 minutes or so in the session, so please get in any questions you have. We have an eminent panel here, all in one place that you won't get the opportunity to for a while, because they'll all be busy supporting the recovery efforts. Governor, when you hear both Lilia's comments and Saurav's, what should Sri Lanka continue to focus on in terms of building that strong macro dashboard amidst these shocks, amidst these uncertainties in the global environment that still persist? Maybe they didn't quite pan out the way, the worst case scenario that we expected in 2025, but we can see now that the good work done to build fiscal buffers helped us deal with the crisis we're facing today. Similarly, how should we think about the things Sri Lanka needs to do to remain resilient alongside those external uncertainties that are shaping? And maybe, I know it's not in the central bank's mandate, but if you could also share about some of those medium-term growth and competitiveness issues that we need to think about to support that resilience, support those buffers.
Yeah, thank you, Answer. I think it's an important question based on Ria's comment as well as the global earlier Jayok's presentation on the medium-term reforms. What I see, obviously, the stability that we have basically achieved is a foundation for growth. Even going forward, we need to ensure we maintain the monetary stability, fiscal stability, and also external stability. That's important, and also financial system stability. So even going forward, for us to go into a higher growth path, we should not weaken the foundation for the stability as a first part. And from there to go into a higher growth path, I think it's very important all these reforms implemented timely manner. I think what I see some few important reforms, because I think what Lilia's comment of this year growth is mainly coming from a higher demand for consumption. That obviously in the required process, that is a natural process. Consumption demand will have to come up first, and then for us to convert, for industries and production process to convert that into investment, you need to have a confidence in investment, and not only the provision of credit into the investment, but also for people to have a confidence to convert that in the consumption demand into investment demand in terms of expanding their operations, expanding their businesses. For that, first, I think facilitator, first one I would see the sovereign rating is an important factor. That we are hoping that there will be improvement in this rating that will improve confidence of the investor. Second part was the facilitation by two reforms, doing business environment easier through some of the reforms already linked with the ADB World Bank, the budget support programs. So very important reforms. One I see is important one is to making basically reducing the non-tariff barriers, and all these trade-related reforms are very important, especially if we are to link up with supply chains in the region. That's the important reform as far as I can see. Secondly, the labor reforms and productivity reforms, because here in Sri Lanka we don't have that much of a demand on labor. productivity can come only through the labor productivity using the technology, AI as well as digital technologies. That is where we can catch up with the growth. We need to have important reforms implemented to improve the productivity of the labor and also reduce the barriers for trade and have access to regional markets. I saw government has made a decision to link up with RCEP. This is a very important link up for supply chains in the region for us to have much open trade with the diverting, the trade, all this. Plus domestic, the single window, the inland revenue reforms, customs reforms, those we should not forget. We need to focus on these areas despite all these short-term kind of shocks that we can, I'm sure fiscal space is there, we can manage that. I'm not too much concerned on that. And the important point, what we see from our point of view, we might see a small uptick in inflation as a result of these supply side disruptions. I think this is something, nothing that we want to worry about, but that could reflect, given the low inflation environment, this 2% inflation going up to maybe a little faster to up to 3% is not a surprise, given the short-term impact. But over a period of time, that once supply side issues are addressed, I will see we will come back to normal inflation trajectory. We'll maintain the stability going forward as we have been doing so far under the multiple framework. So that's the comment I want to make here. Thank you.
Thank you, Kaman, and also touching on inflation, because there was a question from the audience around any early assessments of the impact of inflation. So I hope you got an answer on that. ST, there are a few questions coming in here, which as the government representative on the panel, perhaps you could help answer. I'll club them all together and you can decide how you might answer them. One is around support for SMEs. SMEs could be one of the worst affected segments. What plans are in place to rebuild them? So maybe you can also comment about how the government thinks of supporting businesses and SMEs alongside how some of the measures you had already begun even before. So that's one segment, SMEs. Another question is around a different segment of society. What immediate and long-term measures will the government implement to support families who lost their homes in the disaster? And finally, going even beyond, perhaps more in the reform area, what are the privatization plans to increase efficiency and reduce bureaucracy? So if I was to kind of summarize them, folks are concerned about how the government might respond to some specific segments that are going to be worse affected and less resilient, that is, households who lost their homes, poorer families, SMEs, but also there are concerns about whether that earlier SOE reform, privatization agenda is still going to be on the cards or what. So I'd characterize those questions in that way.
There will be shocks. It could be external or internal. Yet the government is very focused as to where we need to take the country. Therefore, the growth trajectory is planned very well. That's why in the budget is 6 strategies were identified emanating from the inclusive growth strategy, the export diversification, opening up new markets, opening up for expanding for new products, etc. Then regional development as the third one, continuing the manufacturing economy, strengthening that one. That's where it will get connected to SMEs. I'll come into that one. And stabilization, continuation of the stabilization path and the digital drive. So government has laid down a very clear path with 6 strategies that we are going to take the country forward to the range of growth within the 7% GDP that we are targeting at in the medium to long term. In order to get there, obviously, we will be working and supporting our business communities, including the SME sector. We know so much of support that we have from multilateral agencies to achieve these objectives and growth. World Bank and ADB may be here in person, but all the other multilateral agencies have reached out to us already, with whom we are working with, extending their support and assistance to get engaged, to take the journey, not to get distracted, provide the relief for the initial aftermath, and to continue the journey of growth, the plan that we have laid out. You asked about the homes to be rebuilding. This morning, we authorized a 7.5 billion rupees to be released from the treasury for those exercises. So those funds will go into the homes requiring those assistance for those households for initial to obtain the requirements, material, utensils, etc. from that to start the rebuilding process. So the journey will continue for SME sector to support in terms of getting back into business as early as possible. That's, as I mentioned, we are working with the insurance industry. I'll wait to hear their suggestions during the engagement that I will have with them shortly. And similarly, we will engage with the banking sector and all other sectors to understand what is the impact to their clients, customers, and how to get together to work as a team to take the country forward, because the entire ecosystem has to be strengthened for us to move forward as a country. In that journey, I'm sure all will support and come forward to facilitate the objectives that we want to achieve. Honorable member, Dr. Harsha is here as well. I would say most of the time, very productive suggestions have been offered. It's the collective effort that we have to take the country, economy forward, to give hope back to businesses and families. Yes, we can do it. You alluded to the investments options available also. That journey will continue. So for SOEs, boards have been appointed, KPIs have been given to them to deliver. Government and the Treasury will monitor them very closely. So those activities will continue. And the objective is to create the holding company structure. The SOEs that meets the governance criteria, accountability framework, etc., will be brought into the holding company and will be monitored for a period of time. And government is open for investments, which we have mentioned early. So those engagements will continue with renewed veracity and energy. I would look at it only that way. It will not slow down. It will in fact re-energized to continue that journey, to build that momentum. So together, all of us, we will be able to create that Sri Lanka that we want.
Thank you, ST. I think some of the comments you brought out also reflect some of the questions which we won't be able to take today, and also might be too early to discuss in detail. The role of green bonds and resilience bonds in attracting funding for rebuilding infrastructure. There have been questions about parametric insurance products for households and SMEs. I think clearly it's positive that there's now a new interest in these kind of things among this audience, and hopefully whether it's the banking regulator, whether it's the insurance regulator, supported by these development partners, we can start looking at some of those products. I have a closing question to Lilia and to Georg. ST talked a lot about this, the ecosystem has to come together. All of us have to come together. This morning we heard the news about a committee that was appointed to overlook rebuilding. It's not just the governance of the fund financially, but it's also in terms of determining priorities, in terms of making allocations. Given the scale of this disaster, given the spectrum and heterogeneity of individuals impacted, given the new themes we need to bring in thinking about resilience, sustainability, vulnerability among the poor, and institutions like yourselves also putting in money for rebuilding, tell us about your views on how Sri Lanka should think about inclusivity in decision-making around this rebuilding. Inclusivity around how we think about what to prioritize, what segments should get help, beyond thinking mechanically that we have this pot of money, let's mechanically figure out how we assess, and how do we think of who gets to decide and envision what that future rebuilding looks like. Lilia first and then Georg.
Thank you, Anushka. This is really a very important question, and thank you for raising it. Because in this type of, you think about reconstruction, this is the aspect that you may ignore, how make the disaster governance inclusive. So this should come as a priority as well in the list of priorities going forward. I just before coming here, I checked the statistics. I don't know the source. Apologies for that, but I saw that women are 14 times more likely to die during disasters than men. So this is a study based on all disaster all over the world, based on a research. So which means we cannot ignore this importance of inclusivity, and this is about women, but of course inclusivity means a more broader sense. And then when it comes how we govern the disaster, it is also important to take into account that inside the communities that were affected, women are, and some groups of the population are important share, and they have different type of needs that should be prioritized when we bring reconstruction and rehabilitation programs to these communities. And I can bring you the Sendai framework, about disasters, that is UN-led framework about how to govern disasters. This is what they put, this requirement, of course it's a recommendation, is to have 40% representation in committees that are aimed to bring disaster governance. So anything happening post-disaster, so their framework requires to have 40% women representation. And it's not only just representation, it's also substantial roles to women having at least one leadership position in these committees. So this is why I think, it is important to see who are the people who will be focusing on prioritizing actions going forward, because identifying the real needs is the most important part to bringing the meaningful support to the community. So this is why your question is important.
Thank you, Lilia. Gewog?
Coming from an institution that several years ago set the target to have parity at the leadership level, gender parity, and has achieved it, I can see the impact of that in terms of more robust, inclusive, and sort of complex decision making. So that's personal experience. I'm very proud to be part of that institution. Now, what you are referring to is a systemic issue in Sri Lanka and in South Asia and many other countries, right? We see it in boardrooms. We have released numbers several months ago on women workforce participation, and while education level of women in Sri Lanka is actually higher than of male, when it comes to their workforce participation, there is a cliff after education, higher education in particular. But we see this in boardrooms. We see it in, even Chambers, I think, board will probably, since we're among friends talking about, will reflect this. We also see some progress, and we've been engaged through IFC program with many of the corporates, and we see some real progress happening there, right? But I think inclusivity, you were referring probably also in broader terms, not only in terms of gender. And in this sort of crisis time, I think it will be important to make sure that inputs are received from broad sectors of economy and society. If it's businesses, it's SMEs and larger. It's not only domestic, but it's also international, etc. And then households, women, men, and so on, rural, urban. But also it will be important to balance that with fast decision making. I think that is going to be where the government will need to find that right balance, that it is able to get inputs, but is also able to make fast decisions. Because I have seen that sometimes, coming from very good intent, attempt to, get every single input slows down dramatically decisions, especially during these crisis times.
Thank you, Gewog. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a lot more that we could ask them, but unfortunately we are out of time. Saurabh, we would have loved to hear more about the international, but I think you can recognize that given the current situation, we couldn't, but please interact with the audience. Gewog, Lilia, Dr. Harshana Suryaperamesti, Dr. Nandala Veerasinghe, Governor, thank you for your remarks. I think there's a challenge for all of us as interested stakeholders in the future of this country, as those who care about resilience, sustainability, and inclusion, and especially for the private sector to think about who gets to shape the future after a crisis. We've now gone through multiple crises over the last few years. I think we have a long way to go in improving who gets to decide the shape, direction, and nature of that recovery. I think we have yet another opportunity to prove that we can figure that out better, get the support from these institutions, and really make a difference. Thank you very much, and thank you to the Chamber for inviting me and us to join this opening panel. Thank you.